Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation. I'm Michael Zakaris from Ashoka in the United States. These weekly Welcome Change conversations are our opportunity to share with all of you what's working and what's next, straight from our network of Ashoka Fellows, both here in the US and across the globe. We've got people from the broad Ashoka community listening in, I think in the US and beyond, and special welcome to those from the Eye2Eye and Peer Health Exchange networks who are also listening in. Today we've got an especially fun format where we have two Ashoka Fellows who are going to interview each other on the theme of what we're calling the other pandemic, essentially on the toll that this year has had on young people, on their learning, on their mental health, but also the role that David and Louise and their organizations are playing to respond to this moment and to move forward better than ever. As always, if you have questions during the conversation, you can submit them via the Q&A button below. And I'll step back in right near the bottom of the hour or just after to wrap things up. Also, for anyone who needs it, we do have live closed captioning, which you can enable at the bottom of your screen. So yeah, Louise, David, I'm going to hand it off to you and give you the pleasure of introducing each other. And Louise, maybe you can start us off.
I would be honored to. Thanks so much, Michael, and welcome everyone. I'm super excited to get to introduce my friend and mentor and colleague, Dave Flink, and Eye2Eye. So just to give you a little bit of context on both Eye2Eye and Dave, for more than 20 years, Eye2Eye has been teaching students with learning differences, encompassing specific learning disabilities such as dyslexia, as well as attention-related challenges such as ADHD, that they have a right to be seen, heard, and valued. And by partnering with schools, Eye2Eye helps students who learn differently embrace their strengths, build their self-esteem, and learn the skills to become self-advocates. Eye2Eye is run by and for people who learn differently. And Dave takes pride in being a person who has dyslexia and ADHD. While he started Eye2Eye at 18, he now takes joy in spending most of his time learning from young people who learn differently and are currently in school, helping channel their voice, and most importantly, giving them a platform to share their wisdom with other students and adults alike. And the other thing I'll just say about Dave on a personal note is that Dave and I met actually serving on a board together for Generation Citizen, incredible organization we both love. And I have personally just learned so much from him as a colleague and a mentor and a friend. And we turn to each other when we have challenges, both for organizations and in managing our leadership personally. So it's just a real honor to get to do this together today, because we would be doing this anyway. So we're so glad to get to do it with all of you.
Awesome. Oh, thanks, Louise. It is great to see you. I wish we could be together right now, but I'm happy to do this with all of our friends tuning in. Big thanks to Ashoka for giving us this space to do that. And I will start my introduction with you noting that we're about the same age and we founded our organizations at about the same time. So it's wild to be talking now close to 20 years later from the founding organizations, thinking about how we're listening to young people. So let me share a little bit about why Louise is a mentor to me and really a mentor to so many of us through the lens of Peer Health Exchange. So Peer Health Exchange was founded by young people, for young people, very similar to Eye2Eye in our model. But here's the difference. They empower young people to make healthy decisions on topics like mental health, sexual health, and substances. Over the last 20 years, Peer Health Exchange has trained an amazing 15,000 college students to deliver health education to 150,000 ninth graders through schools. In the midst of this pandemic, Louise and I have talked a ton. It has been astounding what Peer Health Exchange has done. They have responded to young people asking to do more, not less, do more, to meet them where they are, not only in schools, right? Peer Health Exchange, college age health educators have shown up for high school students on social media platforms like TikTok. And in May, I hope you'll talk a bit more about this, Louise. I know you're releasing an app that's going to launch publicly. So I know it's exciting to share that here, to continue to share this knowledge, this incredible knowledge that young people have with proximity, right? Again, back to where we began, we started this work as a young person. We are slightly older now, right? But you were driven by the experience of growing up in the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Ever since, I know you continue to be inspired by what young people do for each other, and especially in this moment, I know we're going to get into all of that. I'm going to ask the first question of you, Louise, which is normally I'm impulsive. That's my ADHD piece. If we were walking somewhere, I would have done this anyhow. But I'm not going to ask any surprising questions. This is the question I think that brought everyone here today, right? What is the other epidemic from your viewpoint? How are young people navigating this time through isolation, mental health? I mean, I remember meeting up with you at the beginning of the pandemic and you sharing with me how you took a minute to, everyone freaked out, but you guys listened to your young people and you charged ahead. And I'd love to just give everyone a landscape of what you've seen and how your work has evolved in this moment.
Oh, thank you so much for that. It is true. I love when we are walking or hanging out because we're both really into asking questions, and it's always a bit of a race, like who gets to ask the first question. So you won. So I would say that, as you all I'm sure know, that the data that's come back within the last year on this other pandemic, the mental health pandemic, is really quite startling, whether it's about the rate of anxiety and depression in young people, which has more than doubled. They're now over half of young people are identifying that they're struggling with either some form of anxiety or depression right now, or have been for the last year, or even suicide ideation, suicide attempts. Those are the more extreme examples. But I think the bottom line is that the pandemic has really exacerbated issues that have always been there. And I can't wait to hear how you will describe this for the work that you all do. But in our context, young people have always struggled with their mental health. Actually, most people struggle at some point with their mental health. I think that's what makes all of this so personal to all of us, as we all know someone who in our family or in our broader group of friends has struggled. And it's actually a normal thing to struggle with your mental health. And what you really need in those moments, whether you're a young person struggling or an adult, is you need to know how to get help when you need it, and how to both help yourself, help a friend, help a family member, get to a professional, etc. And so what we saw in the beginning of the pandemic was those rates of anxiety and depression rising, the obvious social isolation that especially young people who need that social connection were facing. But I think the story that's less told, that of course is so inspiring to us, is that young people were also the first ones to act on that problem and to show up for each other. So I think I told you, Dave, at the time, the story that really inspired me. The very beginning of the pandemic was probably like March 20th. So very early on in lockdown, we were still, as an organization, struggling to figure out how to respond when we had to close our in-person programming, obviously, for the year. We're trying to figure out this whole digital virtual solution. And of course, it was actually our young people who showed us the way. So one young person in particular, a person who identifies as Jolie, uses she, they pronouns in New York at College of Staten Island, actually started recording for us videos in their room at home as Jolie was literally going to virtual college at College of Staten Island, and by the way, working as an essential worker in a hospital in New York in lockdown as their part-time job, and living at home and doing all of this. And at 10 o'clock at night in their room was recording these videos on how to cope during the pandemic for other young people through Pure Health Exchange. And it just seemed, I remember myself sort of struggling with my own overwhelm at that moment, and seeing this video and just being like, okay, I can do this. The least I can do is show up and figure out how to get this video to lots of young people. So I just think that part of the kind of need has really, of course, shown us all the need and broader inequity in that need, especially for young people of color in this country. But it's also shown us that those young people, actually in particular, are the first ones who know how to do and show up for each other in ways that if we just give them that platform and that space, they will help themselves and each other get through this. And actually, we will be stronger for it if we follow their lead. So Dave, I'm of course now going to ask the question back of you of, you similarly had, I just think, incredible, from what I learned, courage and leadership from your young people, not only in the program, but also in sort of their advocacy. Tell us more about what that experience was like in the beginning of the pandemic, and your response, and how it's formed since then.
I was thinking as you were talking, and even in the framing of this time together, we're talking about the other pandemic and about mental health. But as you were speaking, what you were sharing was there was a pandemic before the pandemic too, right? Mental health is not a new issue. Things got worse. And if you were on the margins, things got incredibly worse for you. And, I remember, same time as all of us when the world changed. And as someone actually with a learning disability, immediately I freaked out. And the reason why is that if you have dyslexia and ADD and you're in our schools, in all likelihood prior to the pandemic, you did not feel that they were ever really open for you. Students who learn differently always struggled with getting what they needed to succeed. There was tons of stigma. Mental health issues were always highly tied to having a learning difference because of the stigma. And my personal freak out was remembering what it was like then and realizing how much worse it could be for our young people. And similar to you, I was having a panic attack. And where did I look? My young people. And what was amazing to me, and I think if you look at any social movement, you'll see young people are always the first to create change. And so I went to my young people and just literally reached out to just a handful of the thousands of folks that we work with. I said, I need to know what are you feeling? What do you need? How can I help? Because in my position, while technically I work for a board, I work for them, just like you, Louise. I know we talk about that all the time. And they were doing things just like what was happening for you, right? They were like, well, for first things first, we're making some videos and we're sending them to the students that we classically work with. We know we're not going to see them in person. We're going to tell them they're going to be okay. And remember that 1 in 5 people learn differently. And all of a sudden, I picked myself back up the ground and I said, okay, well, all I have to do is be what I sort of think of as a bumblebee, cross-pollinating, now virtually. It used to happen in person and now virtually. And it took about a week. And then we just responded. With that said, and I think, we've all seen this, but it's important to mention here because mental health is just not talked enough about. Those who were already on the margins have suffered more during this time. And, I'm particularly curious as we start to look now. I mean, I have a little bit of optimism about where we're headed in schools and in the world, and I hope others joining can feel that a little bit too. What are you excited about, Louise? What have been the things that have been bright spots for you? I mean, you gave that story, but I know that story launched into a very big movement. Can you talk a little bit about that? Can you talk about what you see ahead?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it is amazing how in so many ways, I think what we experienced in that moment and what you experienced in that moment, what lots of organizations, I'm sure many people on this call today saw, was just this acceleration of a sense of possibility beyond anything that we ever imagined. So we had been for years dreaming of this PHE in a box tech product that we would be able to then serve young people in rural Mississippi, where we had done a study years ago with Youth Tech Health, an awesome partner of ours. And basically the study had shown us that they also needed identity affirming, inclusive, evidence-informed health education, but we're not getting it. But there's no central place where we could launch a site and have even a college that was close in physical proximity to these rural young people in rural Mississippi. And so we had dreamed of a day where we could have a digital version of what we do, but honestly, we were kind of slow in executing on it, partially because there was no pressure to do so. We had a school-based program, it was going pretty well, and we were sort of plodding along on the growth trajectory there. This whole moment of the pandemic and Jolie and other young people inspired us to just put a major gas pedal behind that work. And we have, what I'm most excited about now is kind of unlocking the potential of a college-age young person anywhere showing up for a high school-age young person anywhere. And what we started to see on that is just this power of actually using a digital space. So TikTok was our first example of it, where these short form videos would literally get a ton of traction, some of them from young people, and comments in the section around the video saying, I needed this, I need more, where do I get help? And if a 15-second video on TikTok, that, by the way, my mistake, I thought TikTok was all dance videos. Turns out there's not so great stuff on TikTok, but there's also a lot of really valuable content, including our college students producing short form videos on these topics. And it sort of showed us oh my gosh, if we could show up for young people digitally and have the same secret sauce of our school-based program of college students and give them opportunities to connect with high school age youth and have community and have discussion groups, you could access this from anywhere, anytime. And actually, you can't even do that in our school-based program. If you're not in a 9th grade classroom that we serve, you don't get this. And that's kind of what young people said to us when we asked them, is they were one of our young people in our youth design group this fall went to her school to try to bring Pro Health Exchange to the school and wasn't successful. And the school principal was we don't have the time, we don't have the money. And she came back to our staff working on this digital community, and she was we need to speed this up. Like, I'm not waiting on my school to bring me inclusive, identity affirming, evidence-informed health. That's just honestly not fair and not just. And like, this needs to be available for anyone, anywhere right now. So I think that's what I'm excited about, is kind of unlocking the potential of a movement by young people for young people, and honestly, like following their lead, kind of removing the adults and the institute. Like, we'll still show up in schools, but not having institutions and adults like control all the things for young people. So so that's the vision I'm excited about. Similarly for you, you got to tell us more about not only the vision of by young people for young people with eye to eye, but some of what they've already done. I remember that letter you shared with me that your young people had put together for President Biden when he and Vice President Harris came into office. Tell us more about that. That was so inspiring.
Yes, I love, that's a great example. Thanks for, I wasn't actually thinking about it until just now, so I'm glad you brought it up. You know, I think I want to talk a minute on the adults piece that you brought up and how we slow things down, and then I'll use that letter as an example, right? I mean, as an adult, you know, I put quotation marks around it, but 41, fully an adult, or so I'm told. It's wild to me how we just get, you know, fixed in our mindset. And it takes changing the context to realize that those mindsets don't have to be fixed. And, you know, I keep thinking about buses during this time, and how like buses historically were used as instruments of racism. And for those who don't know, buses have often been instruments of ableism when people with disabilities were forced to ride shorter buses instead of regular buses in order to get to school. And during the pandemic, buses were used as hotspots to provide digital equity for people who didn't have high-speed internet, right? So like, how are we as adults that construct things make things accessible or not, right? And learning is fundamental to schools, and we construct, you know, boundaries around them. And so to the question of what we did in turning to young people, we realized we had a new administration coming in. Some people were excited about that. Some people were very upset about that. Either way, we gathered 150 people virtually, which we had never done before. All of our gatherings always had to be in person. They took a year to plan, and people flew in from all the country. And then we just, on MLK weekend, invited anybody and everybody to come together. So we had a very diverse group of people, with the through line being LD. And I always think about learning differences having great intersectionality. So we had the LD being like, you learn differently, but everybody showed up with a lot of different experiences. And then they said, this is what we want schools to look like when they reopen. And that letter got put together, and ultimately they got all their friends to sign on, and then it got sent to the Biden administration. And, you know, whether or not, here's the question I have for the future. It is our responsibility now to decide whether we read the letter. And that's my question. And that's, I mean, I'm an optimist, as you know, and I know you are too. So I have every belief that that letter has been read, and that the policies that, you know, get made will be reflective of that. You know, what I want to ask, because I know we're keeping the session kind of quick, but we've made some jokes about our age. But I want to ask you, as we kind of get to, before asking, you know, questions from the audience, what does it mean for you to be a white leader? You know, you started this, and I'll just say it because we're friends, right? You were one of the young people, and now you're not, right? And you've done a great job listening and channeling, but what does it mean to be a leader in this moment? How have you done well in your perspective? What are things you wish you had done differently?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I'm definitely not a young person. Also 40. Something about turning 40 really like sealed the deal on that, by the way.
Yeah, pandemic, by the way, you get a redo. So we can celebrate our 40s.
Yeah, we need to do that. I remember talking about that. But yeah, I think, I mean, honestly, look, I think part of what has been really humbling for me over the years is realizing like the power and privilege I had as a white female young person at Yale founding this organization. And yes, being a young person, and yes, having had experience with myself with some of the issues that we addressed as a young person, like watching people I knew who were struggling with HIV. And yet, I think what was so limiting in the beginning of PHE was that I couldn't see the extent to which my identity as a white female and a white female at Yale really limited the number of young people that we were engaging. I remember thinking, like, especially because I grew up in a really diverse community in San Francisco and with really strong values around racial equity, I thought that I would be the first one to notice if we were not actually being as inclusive or as representative of the young people that as we should be. And I didn't want to do it in a superficial way. And so I waited far too long to really understand what those biases were for us as an organization. And literally like the first 10 years of PHE, while we had some diversity in our college student, volunteer, and health educator base and staff, it was pretty limited. And a lot of the people who were attracted to this organization were white women. And I was sort of surprised by that, in that way that is just the classic bias of racism and systemic injustice in this country, right? So finally, 10 years in, with incredible leadership from colleagues at PHE, in particular colleagues of color, we finally committed to really tackling how we as an organization could be inclusive of the unbelievable amount of diverse, dynamic college students that are out there, and really clearly set our own metrics for success around that as a staff and as a college health educator base, and now as a board. And now I'm really proud of the work that I have been lucky to be a part of, and transitioning to be a much more inclusive organization and representative of the young people we serve. We're now a majority folks of color, both staff-led organization and also volunteer college health educator base. And that, I think, has made the work so much stronger. And when we think about a movement, like there's a movement of, young female white leaders is going to be very limited in the impact that it can have, but a movement that includes a majority of folks who identify as Black, Indigenous, Latinx, people of color, LGBTQIX, if we can actually include all young people and have it really represent the young people that they serve, then like the possibilities are endless. So I think in terms of my leadership, one thing I've reflected on a lot is, how do I continue to use my power and privilege in every way that I can to move this work forward, bring resources to the work, bring great people to the work, et cetera, but also make the space for other people to lead and for other young people, in particular young folks of color, to lead. And that's honestly a huge part of how I'm spending my time now, and how I hope will evolve in the work to a day where I'll be proud to have been a part of this, but not lead it anymore. So that's sort of the trajectory I've been on. I know you've been thinking really similarly, and would love to hear your reflections too.
Yeah, I mean, we've had these conversations for a long time, and I think, the thread that you highlighted, which has always been so important to me as well, just who are you talking to and who are you talking with, and ultimately who are you serving, right? If you come in with a vantage point of servant leadership, then it's never about you. And how do you get out in front of your biases, and how do you pay attention to the way in which you're showing up in communities, without being completely redundant to all the things you say, because we followed the same journey. I just will share a definition of DEI that was given to me that I think, just if you can commit to it, it's where we go, right? So diversity is a fact. This idea that you need to define it, it's a fact, and if you appreciate it and that's something you honor, then you don't have to go much further than just looking around and making sure you have a very wide net that's representative of the world that you believe is out there, because it's there, right? Equity is where there's a choice that's made, and we make those choices all the time. And if we recognize when we're making a choice to be equitable or not, we're able to then, actually look critically at why the room looks the way it looks, or how we ended up making a mistake and not actually aiming for equity, even if our goal or value was that. And then, inclusion is just the outcome, right? And how you include others is driven by the D and the E, right? And so, your commitments matter. And, I think I'm constantly struck. I have said I will work here and serve eye to eye in this capacity and in this way, to the extent that it seems to make sense for our community. I know who I serve, right? And I serve our students. And I think, as we have this conversation about what is the role of people to share their full selves in their identity, the answer is to be honest about your limitations and to be passing the mic. I wrote a piece right around when Amanda Gorman was suddenly becoming a person that everyone knew. And I was struck by the fact that many people were painting her like this treat, this unicorn. And I am not discounting anything about how incredible she is. She is absolutely an amazing human being. And we deserve to celebrate her in all the ways, including the piece on Vogue that Vogue did on her this week, which I recommend everyone reading if you haven't seen it. And also, we need to create a world where there are way more people like Amanda Gormans, right? The statistics about somebody who has a learning difference like her, a young woman of color from a single parent household, if she had not gotten some of the support from her mom and from some of the nonprofits that she participated in, we would never know who Amanda is. And then ultimately the Bidens passing her the mic and the NFL passing her a mic, giving her those platforms. That's why Amanda Gorman is incredible. And we know about her. She was an incredible human. We have to create a world where there are way more Amanda Gormans. So I'll just sort of cite that as a place where we should be driving towards. And if we commit to that, we can actually do it. I know there's some questions, right? I know there's some questions coming in and we can start to look at them. One of them is not in a language that I speak, which is wonderful. I don't know, Louise, if you can speak that language. It just got popped in there.
Oh, that's awesome, though.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we have some assistance in translation.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ashoka.
That's wonderful. I know there's some questions about how organizations have changed. You've talked about externally what you're doing differently. Are there some things internally that you would want to share with us that maybe a lesson learned?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the change is so hard for human beings in general. And I think what I'll say is that what I'm struggling with, honestly, every day is the mix of clarity that I think we have on our vision around being this organization that is by young people, for young people, anywhere, everywhere, and what we need to do to make that happen, and how deeply rooted that has been in our young people demanding that and showing us the path. So that feels super clear, but the path to getting there, of actually changing an organization, in our case, one that has been, school-based, in person only for essentially almost 20 years. It's not easy, and we have made a ton of mistakes along the way of trying to make those changes and figure out how we should be structured and what roles people should have. And I think there's just this real tension between the clarity of the vision of where you need to get to, the importance of getting there and being unapologetic and centering on young people and what they want and need, and at the same time just being real that, like, we have an amazing group of staff members who work with Peer Health Exchange, for Peer Health Exchange, and that those changes are, even just to go from that former version of the program to this new one, they're hard and they're real. And I think amidst a pandemic where people's lives have been completely upended, and especially folks living with marginalized identities, those lives have been, I mean, this past week, again, I can't believe it, once again, every staff member at Peer Health Exchange in the last month who identifies as Black or identifies as AAPI has another layer of pain and trauma yet again that they've been experiencing. And so I think it's just change, that the balance between vision and direction and change, and also me being real about the hardship of that change and trying to do it with as much care and grace and humanity and honesty as possible. That's sort of where I'm trying to center, but I know I have done it many times not right in the last year, and I'm just hoping we can keep every time getting a little bit better. And I see we've got a question, Dave, here from, I don't know if we got the translation or not, but when we're ready, we'll talk about what our call is to action as well.
Yeah, I see two quick questions that I think we can answer. One is how to start a peer-to-peer mental health group. I feel like, Louise, that might be a perfect question for you to help us with. And then there was a question around my letter, the Eye-to-Eye letter, which is on our website, and we can send it back out if somebody on the Ashoka team can't find it easily on our website. Can you talk to us a little bit about, what you would recommend for a peer-to-peer mental health group, starting something like that?
Totally. Well, first of all, definitely reach out. My information is here and will be in the follow-up. We would love to help you do that in any way that we can, and hope that our platform that Dave kindly mentioned earlier, which is launching in May, will be one place that you'll be able to have the platform to do that if you want to join that. And I think even without Peer Health Exchange, there's a lot obviously that you can do in your own community, specifically by organizing, in particular, asking the young people, the peers that you want to serve, and maybe that's just yourselves, your young people in your community, what they want and need. And it's amazing how much insight. I mean, this is sort of like in the beginning of PHE, what we did, we were actually, college students from Yale were tutoring like reading and math in New Haven Public Schools, and this group of young people at Wilbur-Cross High School were like, don't do that. You're not very good at it. You don't know how to teach reading and math. That's our teacher's job. What we want you to do is teach health, because we lost the budget for it. No one's teaching it. We don't want to hear it from our 6-year-old teacher, but we do want to hear it from people like you. So I just think, like, I'm always humbled by asking young people, when you start something, like, what do you want to learn? What do you need? And then I think from there, honestly, you can build it based on that insight. And again, feel free to reach out if we can help in any way.
That's terrific. So should we do our wrap question?
Yeah, will you start? I feel like that letter that now you're going to recirculate was a great call to action, but I think you have more than that to share.
That is actually a great, I think that is a great call to action. And if you all go read the letter, Hear what these young people are saying they want their schools to look like, and then call your politicians and demand it. The opportunity I think that exists in this moment is we have relief funding that's being sent to schools, and $3 billion of it to this piece around learning disabilities is allocated specifically for the 20% of students who learn differently. How that money gets spent matters. And I think so often, to the point about being adults think they know what's best. If you talk to young people, they will tell you exactly what they need, right? They know how to ask for what they need. They're more than capable of thinking about what their purpose of an education is. And I think we have to trust that these young people are our future. This generation, I've never had more faith in. They have been through unquestionably a traumatic time that will leave a mark on their lives for the rest of their lives. And they are more resilient than we give them credit for. And if organizations like Peer Health Exchange and Eye to Eye and others can give them the protective, holding so that they can make it into the real world, they're going to change the world. So I would just say, listen to these young people. The letter is a place where you can hear from them directly, and then fight for them along their sides, be their co-conspirators.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think honestly, ask to build on what you said completely. Wherever you go, if people are talking about young people, ask where the young people are. Like, why are they not in the conversation? I have been so shocked this year at the number of times that I have been lucky enough to be part of conversations on like the status of young people's mental health in this country. And you get into the room and there's not one young person, nor has anyone talked to young people. And my incredible colleague who leads our program and strategic learning team at PHE, Angela Glimpf, actually, I thought so powerfully this fall was asked to write a chapter on school mental health for the handbook on school mental health, and basically asked the publisher, like, okay, cool, where are the young people in this book? Where are they in the chapter? And they were like, oh, we don't know. And she said, well, great, I'm going to co-write the chapter with one of our young people. And I think that I admire Angela's leadership for so many reasons, but it's that first question we can all ask if we're talking about young people: where are they? Why are they not there? And then I think, to Dave's point, it's really demanding that as we use kind of this year of like struggle and loss, which is very real, let's make sure we're asking the question, not just like, what have young people lost, but like, what do they have to offer? Because if we see them constantly as like deficits of like, oh, they lost a year of learning, like, here are the problems, this is the stuff we need to like fill the gap for. Yes, those things are all true. And especially for marginalized young people, they're true. And what they bring to the table is incredible. And if we ask ourselves, like, what is it that they bring and how can they show up and help each other, I think we'll be pretty shocked by how much further we get, and we'll stop focusing on all the things we lost and start focusing on what it is that this moment could actually catapult us forward to do.
Louise, you always inspire me, and it's because you challenge us, and you also channel all the voices of young people. So you did for me what you always do when we get to take walks together or spend time together, giving me a lot to think about and making me feel very hopeful for the world.
Right back at you, friend. Right back at you.
And now I get to pass this over to Michael to close us out.
That was fun. Thank you guys so much. It really did feel like we got to listen in to one of your neighborhood walks. So what a privilege for us. And you've set a high bar now for this format. So we're gonna have to challenge other fellows to follow suit. But for everyone here, yeah, we hope you found insights and inspiration to carry forward into your days and weeks. I know I did. We'll send a follow-up email with highlights from the conversation to share. And we hope that you'll follow this news hour, as we like to think of it, with the World Social Entrepreneurs in 90 countries. Again, we're here every Wednesday. Next week, we'll be live from Barcelona with Ashoka Fellow Gemma Galdon, who will tell us about her work to correct bias in technology. Then the following week, we're going to hear about deaf culture and language access and some of the creative ideas emerging from the deaf community. That's with one of our newest fellows, Ashoka Fellow Melissa Malskin. I'm probably mispronouncing her last name. I apologize. And we have much more coming up. So be sure to check the link in the chat and follow along. And enjoy your days. Thanks again, David and Louise, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.